Hello and welcome to the Boostara Podcast. I am your host, James. On the Boostara Podcast, we speak to leaders in business, education, and sport and uncover the truths and insights from their amazing experiences. At Boostara, we help businesses boost growth, cut costs, and gain better business insights. If you'd like to learn more about how we can help you, type the word growth into the comments below and I will be sure to reach out. We are today, amazing, we were just talking about the Six Nations before starting the podcast, but I think it's a pertinent time of year really to have this conversation, have this amazing guest. So we're joined today by Nick Fish, Forwards Academy coach at Welsh Rugby Union and founder of the Iron Bull Scrum Club. Hello and welcome, Nick.
Hi, James. How's things?
Very, very good. Thank you. Very good. I think when it gets to Six Nations and when people start to tune into rugby like Six Nations at this time of year, there's a feeling of spring is coming, and it's a positive thing. I think whenever I see the Six Nations popping up on the TV, so I think this is a positive conversation for us to start.
Yeah, I mean, Six Nation hype starts for me once Christmas and New Year is done. Kind of when we're into January, then we're kind of into Six Nations season, which is always exciting, particularly if you're kind of rugby mad. Yeah. But yeah, Six Nations is always a special time of year.
Yeah, exactly right. Well, I mean, for those, I've obviously dropped, Welsh Rugby, your name, attached to that. I mean, can you, Nick, just give us a bit of a backdrop for listeners listening in that aren't familiar with yourself? Tell us about, who you are and your journey to where you are today.
Yeah, so as per your introduction, so I'm Nick Fish. I'm the Forwards Academy coach at the Welsh Rugby Union. So I work with the Forwards and the program up in North Wales, so RGC. So recently, new role for me. So I joined actually the beginning of this year. Having previously spent 15 years in rugby myself, kind of coaching. I kind of retired from playing early, so fortunately I suffered an injury when I was 21. So the natural progression for me, just by who I was and what I was doing, was to go into coaching. Rugby's always been, and just working with people has always been kind of a passion, even from a young age. I remember back in school, I didn't go to a very affluent school in terms of the curriculum activity and those types of things. So we didn't have a rugby team at the time. So when we were at the kind of the latter stages of kind of being in school, we decided as a group of students, look, we want a rugby team. So it was myself and a few others who ended up coaching that rugby team. So we were 15, 16 at the time. So coaching has always come a little bit natural to me. But as I said, rugby has been a big part of my life for a very long time.
Amazing. And you joined the conversation, on the Boostara podcast after we've had quite a few business coaches, consultants, people that work with business leaders, help them unstitch their problems personally, professionally, in so many ways. And I think you are the first person that we've had come on as a sports coach, right? As a rugby coach, as a sports coach. But I think the principles are very much the same. And I suppose as a first kind of question on coaching, for you, what is coaching? What makes a good, successful coach?
I think it's exactly as you just mentioned there. I think the crossover in terms of fundamentals, the principles are very much exactly the same. You are developing human beings, and that is what first and foremost makes a great coach. It's how a human being connects with another human being. And it's about understanding what makes that human being tick, what's their motivations, how you can help and assist on that journey. The great thing about coaching is you can work with a player for a couple of years, and even for a long period of time. And where they go as part of that journey, you play a really either a small part or a big part, but you still very much play a part of that journey. So for me, good coaching is about good connections, good relationships. It's about being honest with individuals and not holding back in terms of those types of conversations. Having the ability to have difficult conversations, because that happens in business as well. You have to be in a position where you can have those difficult conversations sometimes. So, somebody as well who can adapt And I think, whether it's coaching or business, you have to be adaptable because
Mm.
what you do isn't always perfect all the time. So you have to have that ability to adapt. But I think the biggest thing for me around coaching is the ability to have that mental toughness,
Yeah.
how to deal with setbacks. For example, you're not always going to coach the perfect session, whether that's with a team or whether that's with an individual. In
Mm.
business, you're not always going to make the perfect business decision.
Mm.
So it's how you deal with those setbacks. How do you deal with the ability to bounce back up? And that
Mm.
for me is coaching. It's about the ability to deal with those setbacks, but learning from them as well.
Yeah. And I guess, it will come in a little bit. You'll explain about, Iron Bull Scrum Club. And I know there's a meaning behind the name, right? But
Yeah.
essentially that mental attitude, that mental
Mm.
toughness, would you say it is for athletes, either they have it or they don't have it, or is it something that can be developed? And give you some context. Yeah, I'm
Mm.
reading the book Relentless at the moment.
Yes.
Talks all about the likes of Michael Jordan and that
Mm.
relentless drive for
Yeah.
to be successful,
Mm.
right? And not about the talent, not about
Mm.
the ability, but just that drive to want to get better. And I guess you see it probably with athletes that
Mm.
a lot of them have that drive. They miss some things skillfully or fitness wise, but they've got that drive, and then
Mm.
others that have got the opposite. I mean, yeah, how do you see that kind of question?
It's very much a case of you will work with athletes who naturally are mentally tough,
Mm.
and you do work with that athletes who don't necessarily have that mental toughness. But whichever side you work with, you still have to develop the ability to kind of. There's always going to be setbacks. You could be the best athlete in the world, but you will suffer setbacks. You will be an athlete who may not necessarily be the most talented athlete, but you have to work harder than everyone else.
Mm.
And that's very much the same, from a coaching standpoint. You have to have that mental toughness about you, but the ability to develop mental toughness as well, particularly when you're working with young players, like particularly from an academy perspective. You aren't just coaching and working with the rugby player. You're working with young people who have social pressures, who have
Mm.
academic pressures, who have the pressures of, okay, where do I want to go with my life?
Mm.
And so you're not just looking at that rugby aspect, particularly from mental side, because again, there's pressures there. Players who are in academies or in a pathway, 9 times out of 10, their kind of their motivation is they want to be a professional rugby player,
Yeah.
but that's not always possible.
Mm.
And again, you from a coaching standpoint, from a player standpoint, you give everything, but sometimes that's just the way the cookie crumbles to a certain degree. And same in business, same with coaching. It's
Mm.
sometimes it's based on opinions, which sometimes is the really, I suppose, sad part. But you have to constantly be working at that mental toughness,
Mm.
and whether you're there or not, you have to continue to develop it, and it plays a big part now because you aren't just dealing with the physical development or the technical tactical development,
Yeah.
or the nutrition side or your sleep. you know, the mental aspect is really, really key. Really, really key for all players of all levels.
I think you begged a kind of question in my head. I've often asked this question just among sort of sporting circles. It's like, is there a line, and how do you find that line? On obviously, you want to instill that drive, that mental toughness in young people,
Yeah.
in athletes, but at the same time, for them to recognize when it's too far.
Mhm.
I give you the example. I just realized in the Winter Olympics just a few days
Mm.
ago, I forget her name, but the American skier who she'd gone into the competition
Yeah.
with a knee problem. She said, "I know I'm going to do this," and then
Mhm.
she run, and
Mm.
it was too much,
Yeah.
right? Probably another person would have said, "Well, you probably shouldn't have been on the start line, all right?
Yeah.
You're not in the
Mhm.
right shape, right? That's just a step
Mm.
too far, no matter like mental
Mm.
toughness." within my own sport of running, I see the same thing day in, day out. People have injuries. They've done their Achilles in, but then they still go and race. And then that causes them lifetime problems or surgery that didn't need to happen, all in the name of toughness, mental toughness, just success for that one individual race. I guess, from your perspective, is there a balancing act that you have to play as a coach to get athletes to have that mental toughness, but then understand when too far is too far, or is that too difficult to instill in athletes and kids?
No, there's definitely a line, but I think certainly from a coaching standpoint, it goes back to probably the point I made earlier. I think that then goes back to the connections that you have with your players and understanding them and knowing who they are. That plays a small part, but I mean, if I look at it purely from a rugby perspective, rugby has changed so much, in the last five years, let alone the past 10, 15 years. I mean, I remember when I played when I was a teenager, on a Saturday, I suffered a concussion. It was a nasty concussion, and then back on the Tuesday, then because again that mental, that I suppose that toughness element, that mental side of things, is I was back training on a Tuesday, where now and that's probably an extreme example, but you did that because it was like, well, look, I don't want to sit out training. I've only got a knock to the head, where now the protocols are in place, and certainly from a coaching standpoint, that care element of players, plays a big part of that. So, particularly my sport, the world of rugby, has come a long way around that. And again, it's something that I speak with my players, all the time. It's, yes, there's mental toughness, but what does mental toughness look like? Like for me, for example, part of mental toughness is the ability to show your emotions.
Yeah.
If you are, how are you feeling? Why does that make you feel the way you feel? Whether it's perceived as a negative or a positive, show your emotions. That to me is a mental toughness trait. The ability to block it and not show it because you want to act kind of that macho type scenario. That's not mental toughness in my mind. It's so yeah, I think, certainly from my perspective, rugby's come a long way, and, coaching has come a long way in that aspect. As I said, not to repeat my point, but the connection that you have with a player, and that probably goes to your point then, James, just around that line and where that line is, because every player will be different. And again, probably from a running standpoint, there will be athletes will have their own lines in that particular sport. And so it's the same from a rugby standpoint, but knowing that connection, how far can a player go? But actually sometimes, and this is where you got to be brave as a coach, is, well, actually, no, you may think that's your line, but we're going to just take a step back here.
And
I think that's where you've got to be brave as a coach sometimes. Particularly when there's external factors. That player could be your best player, and you're in a final on the weekend. And there's elements around that. It's a must-win game. Or you could be relegated, for example. There's so many external pressures, particularly in sport, as in business. But I think that's where, as a coach, you've got to be brave, and you've got to put the bigger picture into perspective.
Yeah, and exactly that, because you have that different perspective that the athlete doesn't have, right? The player doesn't have it's a different world being stuck in your own head or your own game when you're a player, when you're an athlete, and that's the point of the coach, is to provide that different perspective based off of all of the hundreds, however many athletes that they've seen over the years go through very similar scenarios. And when they do know the limits of that athlete's physically, psychologically, in all the different elements, then they know when to stop, right? Or when they need to stop. Yeah. Just, I suppose, just in a way like Iron Bull.
But I also think it applies to coaches as well, from a coaching standpoint, because again, you are, you have a coaching team around you, and you have a great relationship with the coaches and the support staff. But, as an individual coach as well, if you've got a squad of 30, 35, 40 players, plus yourself and your team around you, you have to think of your own mental well-being. And that plays a big factor, big factor in coaching. And, I've in the past had discussions with people who run businesses and, you know, and they're business leaders in their own right. And they've said to me the biggest thing that they've probably neglected is that mental element, because there is the pressures of, you know, running a business, running a team, hitting sales targets, hitting profits, you know, making sure that they can pay their staff, you know, getting the marketing out, because, you know, particularly the small business owners who, again, I close connections with friends who do those types of things. And, you know, when I've done leadership conferences, other bits and bobs, but, you know, that's the one element that they've, you know, openly said, look, I've neglected it. And neglected it for their staff as well, because it's not something that's been at the forefront of their mind, even though they're feeling it and you can see it. So yeah, I think it does happen for coaches and business leaders as well.
Yeah. That's intriguing. You actually just thinking about a scrum. It just gave me the thought of a bubble. And actually, with sport, this is often I get that from my own experience. Just trying to perform at a high level.
Yeah.
Whenever I've gotten into that routine and that mindset and that just continual kind of churn of training and competing, I always get the sense of I'm in a bubble, like nothing else matters outside of this. And then when I realize I'm in the bubble, like, no, I shouldn't be in this. This is a negative. This is that there is a life outside of my sport, right? I need to break out of that bubble. And I suppose my question is, you know, do you feel coaches, do you put enough into athletes to get them to understand that they can balance, high competitive sport with, a life?
Yeah.
You see that time and again
no.
with so many athletes, and it's like with these Winter Olympic athletes we're seeing now, they will have been in a bubble for the past 4 years. Especially, this is the pinnacle of what they will achieve and do in their sport, and everything's been building up to that moment, and they've put themselves into that bubble, and nothing exists beyond that. But for me, I often think that that's quite a negative to live in that way, and that balance you need to have. Wondering from a coach.
No, I think that's a great point. I can relate to that. That used to be my go-to. You know, that was my go-to. Put myself in a bubble.
Yeah.
You know, put myself in a bubble. Nothing would penetrate that bubble. You know, nothing would come into it. Nothing, words, feelings. It was just me in my, in my head was my protective space. And for somebody, again, I used to suffer with imposter syndrome. I had imposter syndrome for a number of years because, again, I retired playing at a young age. I wasn't a professional rugby player, but I've worked my way up the coaching ranks. And there were times where you'd be working with ex-professionals and, at some points, coaches who you'd watched, as a kid sometimes, or players you were like, they are superstars and you'd work with them. And so, that for me is the example where I'd go into my bubble. I'm coaching with this person, and it's like the aura element. And you'd always think to yourself, is what I'm saying, is what I'm doing, is how I'm acting, is that the right way? And you'd go into that bubble.
Yeah.
But I mean, go back to your second question. I think for me, it's a case of, as a coach, and this is purely from a coaching standpoint, how and what support can you provide to an athlete? Because that to me is the key. I don't want to confuse like a bubble with focus or drive. And I think that's probably sometimes where they will cross over and can get mixed up a little bit. Because, I mean, on your point there, you look at an athlete like Usain Bolt, he worked for 4 years to do something for 10 seconds. 10 seconds is gone in a flash. But he, to a certain degree, put himself in that bubble, so to speak. And there's obviously, plenty of other examples, but I think where it comes to the athletes that I work with, they have that drive, that focus, is What support do they need? And it goes back to my point earlier on, potentially around the mental toughness side of things is, well, look, you are in this bubble, in your own perception, what support do you need? Don't bottle things up. And that's part of the reason, the mentality element is in, the Iron Bull. So the key aspect around scrummaging is there are elements there that you can't control. It's 16 people looking to, the forces that go through a scrum and the weight that goes through a scrum, both, on the male and the female side of the game at young ages as well. There's a lot of failure, and sometimes young props, hookers they'll fail in the game because of that perceived element. I'm not good enough, because they've lost a scrum or those types of things. But we incorporate the mentality side of things into our 4 pillars, which is how we, part of our development programs. And the mentality element is at the forefront of that. Yes, you may be big, you may be strong, you may be powerful, you may have a great technique, but the ability to, if you look at professional rugby now, the reset scrum, you have a scrum, you reset it. How do you manage that mentally? You may have you may have had 5 scrums, you've won 4. On the 5th one, you were driven back. You were absolutely demolished. Okay, well, what's our mentality there? Do we go away through process? Do we problem solve on the go? Do we go, do you know what? I'm not going to do that anymore. I'm going to do my own thing.
Yeah.
But then from a coaching standpoint, you have to put players and athletes in those positions to prepare for that. So how do you put them in scenarios? How do you put them in high pressure situations, in practices, in training? And that's part of that mental element. But also something that we do is and something I was big on as a player was the vision work. So I work with a lot of hookers where they're thrown at lineouts. And okay, but do you close your eyes and just imagine you throw in, do you know the calls? Do you know your triggers for your throws? And that works exactly the same for props at scrum time. In your head, imagine what does a good scrum look like for you and your process? And we do some vision work, and they go through their binds and they go through the actions, and it's in their head, but they're doing the motions as well. And that plays a big part, which for me was always a very underrated element of the of scrum development. But it also allows habits to be built to go into other areas of life.
Yeah, and you jumped in on the Iron Bull Scrum. So I was going to ask you, the philosophy behind it, and why you set it up essentially, and how can people get involved? Who is the Iron Bull Scrum Club?
So Iron Bull was set up probably for a couple of reasons. One, rugby scrummaging is my passion. It's my absolute passion. I say it on my website. When I was a kid, so the reason I got into rugby was when my dad took me to Cardiff v Newport at the Arms Park. I think it was around 96, 97. And I was just hooked on rugby. I was hooked. But when I was going to rugby training as a kid or whatever, people were passing a ball, people were tackling, and I just wanted to scrum. And it was just I don't know what it was. I just wanted to scrum. And it was just something that I built. So over the years as a player, then obviously when I went into coaching, scrummaging has been, was my passion, and it is my passion. But it was set up for a couple of reasons. One, there's not a lot of emphasis, I think, particularly in Wales, and that's just my viewpoint, around scrum development. I think there's a perception that it has to be either or. So you'll see a lot of pass, catch, those types of things, kicking, which are all really key fundamentals of the game, and props need to have them as well. And the same with, all forwards. But scrum development is the key, key fundamental for a prop. That needs to be their strength. It's like a scrum half. You wouldn't pick a scrum half if they can't pass or box kick. So it was set up for that reason. The other reason it was set up, again, from the mental side of things, something that I never had as a player growing up, was that mental preparation, that mental resilience. And the third reason is just who I am as an individual. I put a lot of emphasis on the person, the connections, developing the leadership element of these. And they're key fundamentals for me as an individual, not just me as a rugby coach.
Yeah.
And so, yes, and that's why it was set up. So it kind of combines a lot of my passions and a lot of my focuses as an individual. And yeah, if anyone wants to get involved, you can go to ironbullsc.co.uk. And if you are looking to develop, scrummaging and the mental side of things and, leadership and those aspects, please get in contact. It's something to behold of.
Amazing. And yeah, I think, the emphasis on, the mental toughness, the mental development, it's really, really interesting because obviously to develop that's you've got to have a connection with someone like yourself to know, okay, Nick knows that I'm at this level right now.
Yes.
And this is the journey I'm going to go on to get to this level, right? In a world where we've got technology everywhere, we've got access to data, especially like professional games, right? Or even, I say to quite a few people, I'm wearing my Garmin watch. I go for runs. Like, woo! Okay, I'd had this when I was a kid. I'd be as I am now, right? We're big on data. We're big on technology. But the fundamentals of mental toughness, that are there any crossovers with technology? And I suppose the big question is, where does AI fit into the game and fit into what you do? Or do you see any positives, negatives in this whole kind of AI revolution that we're going through at the moment?
Well, I mean, certainly from a coaching perspective, and this probably may surprise a few people, but I'm a big believer in using technology. I am a big believer in that. The positives and the advancements of technology I think will be far superior than they are, 5 years, 10 years, even probably next year. But the one thing it can't do is that connection element, that human connection element, is that empathy element, is, okay, you've been with a player for a week and they've been focused, they've been driven, but the following week something's off. Something's not right there. Could that be something to do with academics? Maybe something is wrong at home. As you rightfully mentioned earlier, the social side of things sometimes, those pressures. But you have to, I personally think you have to embrace technology, but you've also got to be smart in terms of how you use it. In terms of from an AI perspective, I think I mentioned the story before, but like I've worked with a coach who is, used AI as part of his coaching, and has used AI to, analyze his coaching session with a group of female rugby players. He hasn't used that AI to replace him. He's used it as a second set of eyes. Which again, I think that for me is brilliant, because I read a book ironically called The Second Set of Eyes from a coaching standpoint, through Cody Royal, and it was a fantastic read, and he works with elite coaches, Pep Guardiola's, those types of coaches, and he is that second set of eyes. But if you don't have access to someone of Cody's expertise, and you've got technology there, having that second set of eyes, because ultimately you don't see everything. And it's not replacing the coach. As I said, it's that second set of eyes, and again, it's having a different, and that's probably key, different perspective on things. But I fully believe in technology. I think, particularly in professional sport, data is a big one. If you look at American football, for example, the sport is pretty much driven on data. Trades, player trades, MVP awards, everything in American football is based on data. If you make one extra yard, it's huge in their data. If you're a running back, rugby is very much the same. There's a lot of data there, but data is part of a bigger picture. It's about building different elements of your picture to make an informed decision. You can't, like, for me, and this is my approach, and again, it's not right and it's not wrong, and other people may have different views. I will use data to form that bigger picture, but I wouldn't make decisions solely based off data. I will base it off data, my visuals from an analyst perspective, what I'm seeing. So using my visuals, my senses, what am I seeing in training, what I'm seeing in games. So it creates that 360 approach. So that's how I use data. And
Yeah.
again, even at academy level, we get a lot of data, both from a team perspective and a individual perspective. And how you analyze that data and apply that data is key.
Mm-hmm. Do you, I mean, as an academy coach, do you share, I mean, I suppose, can the athletes see that data? Are they part of that
Yes.
process as well? Because it's interesting. Obviously, we said at the beginning, an athlete on their own, they think they know where the limits are, but they maybe don't. And the coach is that other perspective. And then it's like the data is then that other
Yeah.
perspective as well.
Yeah.
When you bring all of that together,
Mm.
then the power to, really succeed
Yeah.
and level up is even greater.
Yeah. It's interesting because I've worked with players, like all players I work with will always have access to the data. So they'll always see the data, whether it's from a training standpoint or from a game element. But my experience, it can have a twofold effect. It can bring somebody like, oof, I've made so and so tackles, or so many carries in a game, or something of that nature. But it's also, on the flip side of that, probably added pressure to some players.
Yeah.
Because they've gone, oh, actually, I've hit 10 carries in a game. My target is 15, but I didn't hit those 15 carries, so I must have failed. But then you have to dig a little bit deeper, and sometimes you have to put the perspective on things. Okay, but look at the quality of carry. Was the quality of those 10 carries sufficient enough or better enough to go, well, I haven't hit the 15, but you've got 10 quality carries, but 15 carries which are not great. What's better? Or what is perceived as better? So I think data can sometimes, so that's where you have to work with the player to give them that perspective, to give them that understanding. And again, from a connection perspective, because if a player is driven by targets and goals, then it's okay. How do you bring that into a player? How do you channel that into a player? How do you channel that into training?
Yeah.
Okay, so you're putting targets on this. So how do you dig a little bit deeper with that particular athlete? And as I said, you have some players who it's just data.
Yeah. Yeah.
And they'll want the visual to go with. Okay, I made, from a scrum point of view. Okay, I lost 2 scrums, but I've won 4. Okay, you look at the visuals. It's not actually a bad picture, because again, at scrum time, you could paint the perfect picture, but referee's interpretation doesn't mean you've done something wrong, but because you've got that one negative against you, oof. So it's a really, it's
and then how do you bounce
100%.
out from that, right?
Yeah, and
Because
it's the
you're
learning.
doing everything perfectly, doing everything you should, doing as
Exactly.
much as you can, and then things aren't happening as they should, as the data
Yes.
said. How do you react to that?
Yeah, and again, it's a really fascinating. I don't want to say bubble, because I was going to say bubble, but it's a really it's a really it's a really fascinating picture, particularly with athletes, and again, because particularly with younger athletes, and again, senior athletes as well. Sometimes you're dealing with uncontrollable perception.
Mm.
And it's key. And again, I've got plenty of friends in the business world, and their businesses are run on data, and how they apply that data, and whether that's from a sales pipeline, whether that's from a marketing funnel, whether that's from, again, the technology side of things, the data that AI brings over a human worker.
Yeah. Yeah.
I have plenty of friends in the business world who have those types of conversations. So it's very interesting. But I think when you have to bring it all together to make that concise decision.
Yeah. Yeah. And with a world, and sport being, I suppose, dominated or integrated more with these high levels of technology. I mean, very quickly can you ascertain for your athletes, for your players, are they fit? Are they, exactly what the optimal fitness
Yeah.
is for each position, for each individual, exactly what their diet should be, their calorie intake, their hydration, their sleep, all aspects of their physical self. And, and then the training game, exactly like crunching on the data on their passes, all these type of things that you need to know, that they need to know, and you've got like a perfect team. So then everyone's got a perfect team. What makes the difference? Those marginal games inevitably come down to mental toughness.
Yeah. So, and it's interesting because you look at that from a player standpoint of what you just mentioned there. The biggest thing players will look at, particularly game wise, is GPS tracking. Similar to your, obviously, the Garmin watch, the GPS tracking will track everything at every second that GPS system is active. And in those elements, a player can't hide in terms of their level of work.
Yeah.
Doesn't show the complete picture, and I'll stand by that, but it will show the level of of what that player can undertake. But the GPS side of things, and again, that has become huge in professional sport. Over the last couple of years, and it's again because that technology is advancing, and it's now filtering down to your community level, and it's accessible to them as well. So again, it's just changing that point for non-academy players and players who are in the community game as well.
Yeah. Very curious closing question on technology AI. So, as a coach, what's if a technology or AI could take or contribute one thing to your job as a coach, right? It doesn't exist at the moment. Like, what would have the biggest impact, on your ability to
Great
take
question.
to that next level?
That's a great question. For me, I think it's just having the ability to crunch that data and summarize that data in just a simple format. And again, there is the technology out there. I think it's probably more of from my perspective, kind of applying that level of data. That level of summary in terms of the level of data that we will receive. But yeah, I think for me that probably would be it. I imagine there's probably others out there that I just haven't thought of. But certainly for me, I think just the level of data that you work with, just having something that can give you that sense of clarity, would be, because we all search for that in all walks of life. We all search for the clarity. I mean, clarity is a big buzzword in coaching, particularly from a player standpoint. Everyone wants that clarity. And clarity for me is simple. Keep everything simple.
It's like, imagine a day you wake up and you can just look at a screen of all of your players listed. Green, red flag. What's the problem here? And know what the issue is and why it's been flagged up, and then why you need with that play. Example.
There's a fantastic app out there. It's something I used in a previous role. I imagine they probably won't mind the plug, actually. But it's an app called Athlete. An Athlete allowed players on a daily basis, whether they were in training, out to get, to effectively record and reflect their mood, their sleep, and reflect training and games. And it was really powerful because there was a couple of times that, again, we lost a couple of games, and then you'd see player reflections and you'd see their mood levels. And obviously there's always correlation. You lose a game, you're down. You win a game, you're up. But there were some interesting patterns because even though we lost a game, some players' moods would be up because of their own performance. And then some players who had the, again, perception, they would be gutted and just devastated that they lost, but they were happy with their own performance. And there's some players who would be vice versa. So, we would use that information, that data, to, we would do it anyway. But again, it just reinforces it. We could prioritize where we would spend time with players who needed a bit more in terms of that support. Going back to what I mentioned there about the support element. So if players were below a 5, okay, well they're the first people I need to ring.
Yeah.
Or if they were in lectures, okay, I'll drop them a WhatsApp message and say, look, everything okay? And again, if somebody needed to have a meetup, we wouldn't go into our facilities. We'd go to a coffee shop.
Yeah.
because again, it's I call it a bit more in tune with life.
Yeah.
What we do here is it's a privilege. It's not real, but it is, if that makes sense. If you love what you do, it's never a job, as they say.
Yeah.
But sometimes when you go out into a coffee shop or you go for a walk with a player, you are both, how do I put this? You are both neutral.
Yeah.
You're not in my space and I'm not in your space.
Yeah.
Like if a player walks into my office, there's that era of I'm in the coach's office.
Yeah.
Where if you're going for a coffee with somebody and you've got people around you, you're not Nick the coach, and you're not trying to be Nick the coach even when you're in here, but you are Nick the human being, Nick the husband, Nick the dad.
Yeah.
And again, it's just an example of the probably technology element that's helped with that, and being developed and has enhanced that even more.
Yeah, it's fascinating. Yeah, really, really, really interesting, Nick. And I guess for the Iron Bull Scrum Club, like, the next kind of period, what have you got in store for it? What can people expect if they they want to get involved?
So for me, the journey with Iron Bull is very much fluid. I'm not somebody who will have a really rigid plan in place. I'm somebody who's nice and fluid, and I like to go with what's happening within the world. So for me, it's just about certainly the exposure and getting the message out there and working with people who want to develop the mental side, but also the scrummaging side of things and the leadership side of things. And it's just having conversations. And I think that's really key. It's having conversations with people, and having conversations and understanding, the battles people go through, and understanding, well, look, even if, and I've said this to a lot of people, actually, I've had conversations with people who don't even come from rugby backgrounds, and it's okay. Well, let's just have a conversation.
Yeah.
And you learn a lot about people, and it's not even a case of I can listen for 10 minutes, 15 minutes. If you need to say something, I'll listen. I've got no dog in the fight.
Yeah.
You don't. If someone has something going on in work, or you are just there to listen. So for us, it's just about getting that, working with players of all levels, athletes of all of all levels, and working and spreading the message around, that the emphasis is obviously that rugby scrum development and that technical tactical side and the physical elements, but that mental toughness as well. And that's partly why I named it Iron Bull, is that iron mind, that bull strength. And just really focusing around those two key messages. And I've got some friends over in the States who I'll be going over to see kind of in the summer, and kind of develop the message from there with them. So for me, the Iron Bull has the not the potential, but it's fluid to go wherever it needs to go, and it's not just about the rugby or the physical or the mental or the technical tactical. It is just helping and working with people and talking to people.
Yeah. Amazing. That was an excellent closing message, Nick. And I guess, for those people that do wish to reach you directly, what's the best contact details to get you on there?
I am always open. You can drop me a call, or WhatsApp, an email. I pop it on here, or if you want to post it, I've got no issues with that whatsoever.
Brilliant.
But yeah, as I said, I'm a people person. I love speaking to people. I love to understand people's journeys. I'm always open and honest with my journey. There's probably a lot more layers to me, on this conversation, in terms of, I suppose, why rugby means so much to me and what it's done for me as an individual. So yeah, there's plenty of layers to me, and I'm always open and honest with people.
Brilliant. Well, I'll put your contact details on the website below. One that does, and I would really commend. Exactly. I mean, for anyone that's got to this point in the podcast and listened through, will have a great sense, not just as a coach, if you were to I would feel completely comfortable leaving my, son,
Yeah.
if he were of a good, rugby ability, in your care. But
Well,
exactly that, not just to
well,
train physically, but to train
no,
mentally, be
but
the role model, to
it's
be so many layers of development,
yeah.
for an individual, for a young person, for an adult as well. Yeah.
Well, it's funny you say that because I remember having a conversation last week with another coach, and they asked me, could I coach a football session? And you mentioned earlier on about what makes a good coach. And
Mm,
I think the fundamentals and the craft of a coach are the same across all sports.
yeah.
And you mentioned your son. Could I coach running to the tactical element? Probably not. But we could put some bits in there. I think, coaching is coaching,
Yeah. Yeah.
so,
Exactly.
but I
Exactly.
wouldn't, I wouldn't recommend me coaching running.
Brilliant. But no, it's been absolutely fantastic having you on, Nick. And I think, as a closing kind of takeaway, I think it's really needless to say, but just really for everyone to reflect and think about the, mental toughness, and
Mm,
exactly in the name that you have there for the Scrum Club,
mm,
Iron Bull, iron
mm.
mentality, bull strength, right?
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be physical bull
No,
strength,
no.
and then even manifest itself into
Mm,
further like bull mentality, right?
yeah.
And
Mm,
that kind of that learning, that development, having a coach who can lead you on that journey and be that
mm,
second set of eyes for you, and that
yeah.
third set of eyes if you've got
Yeah.
AI. That's invaluable in
Yeah.
business, in sport, in life in
Mm.
general. Yeah, absolute pleasure having you on today,
No,
Nick.
thank
Thank
you for having me.
you for joining.